Hey, deserving listeners, there's a follow-up to Love is Blind Season 2, so let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and professor. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we're learning 1 year later, or is this just scenes from 1 year later? Let's find out.
If Shayna says that there wasn't flirting, like she's lying, they had been sending flirtatious messages to each other for several months.
Okay, so from what I can tell, what Natalie is saying is that she broke up with Shayne at the altar because, remember, they had that humongous fight, and Shayne, after the bachelor party, right, he was intoxicated and said some really awful things, I think. And Shayne was pretty devastated by that, and Natalie was pretty devastated as well. She did not take that breakup lightly. It seemed legit, like they were in a lot of pain. And then afterwards, they were single, and then they got back together. We also heard this from Shayne when he was on the Nick File podcast that I reacted to. And then this was during that time, I think. And Natalie found that Shayne was cheating, essentially emotionally texting, cheating with Shayna. And this is when Shayna was with her new partner, who I haven't shown clips, but she has a new partner. Shayna was saying that never happened. Shayne admitted to it. He was like, yeah, it happened, and I'm sorry, it was a mistake. And Natalie is just like, what? And so at least for Shayne, he admitted it, whereas Shayna apparently never did. And she's talking about other lies that Shayna committed, like when, I can't remember the specifics, I remember on the beach scene, there was just a lot of really interesting behavior from Shayna, and Natalie is calling that out. Now, maybe Shayna and Shayne would have a different story to tell. I don't know. And then they also showed the scene earlier. They did a recap of Shayna's story, real condensed, that she really wanted to be with Shayne, right? But then when Shayne was with Natalie, Shayna was like, oh, bummer. And then that other fella, I can't remember his name, he proposed to her and seemed 100% in the relationship with Shayna, and Shayna was like, yeah, on her face, she's cringing, like, oh no, did he just propose to me? But then she says yes, and then as soon as they meet in person, if I'm remembering correctly, she just went home. She didn't stay with him in the hotel, and that was it for her on the show. And then she would come back as sort of an ancillary character, this kind of thing. Meanwhile, seemingly trying to get back with Shayne. I don't know. Anyway, so what does this mean about Shayna? Hard to say. If she is lying and Machiavellian in this way, because at least the accusation, if we go with Natalie's account and take on the matter, and Natalie seems pretty level-headed, so it's hard not to at least seriously consider her narrative. I think a lot of people agree with her narrative when it comes to her evaluation of Shayna. So if it were true, which of course we have no idea, what would that mean about Shayna's personality? Well, there are a lot of different possibilities, maybe more than I can mention here. Well, of course, more than I can mention here. But things off the top of my head would be things like, well, there's psychopathy, antisocial personality. People who don't have empathy and thus don't care about lying to others are prone to Machiavellian manipulative behavior, lack of empathy, pathological lying, this sort of thing. I'm not really attracted to that conceptualization, considering that personality type is pretty rare in individuals, and without obviously a full assessment, but also without any other corroborating data points along those lines, that would be kind of a silly thing to consider strongly. The other possibility is that it was modeled to her, that lying and Machiavellian behavior was modeled to her by her family early in life, and she just thinks, well, this is just how people act. This is normal. This is what you do. We all are prone to that. All of us will be on some spectrum regarding various different things. Like for example, who was it that was, I can't remember who was talking with them, and they were like, my partner in their family, they will be really vulgar about their bodily functions. And I grew up in a family where you never talked about that. And so for both of these individuals, maybe they're at either end of the spectrum, they will feel as though one set of behaviors is normal. Like for the person that never talks about bodily functions and their partner does talk about bodily functions because they come from a family that does that, then the person who is more uptight about that will have no problem judging and yelling and rejecting the person who does talk about bodily functions. They feel justified in being extremely indignant and hurtful. Like, what's wrong with you? You're disgusting, that kind of thing. And to the person that grew up in a family where they talked a lot about their bodily functions, they, might do so with their partner that's more uptight, and their uptight partner is like saying, please don't do that. And then the vulgar individual is like, well, screw you, you're uptight. It's normal to talk about bodily function. So both people are coming from their family culture, and they're both being wrong, essentially. They're both not considering that there is another way. They're certainly okay to be there themselves, but they are labeling the other person as pathological, that kind of thing. Anyway, so some people grow up in families where lying is just normal and manipulative behavior is just normal. And so you might head out into the world and just be like, well, this is what people do. This is what's wrong with that? Yeah, of course I lied. Of course I manipulated. I mean, everyone does that. Everyone plays games, that kind of thing. Another possibility is that she had to learn lying and manipulation to survive. If you're being abused or some sort of emotional landmine field, minefield, you learn, okay, the only way I can get through this is if I lie and manipulate, because if I don't, then very bad things will happen to me, emotionally in this family or something like that. So there's the things that pop in my head, but I don't even know if any of that is accurate the way Natalie sees it.
Like something sexual. And so I asked him to show me. There's just comments on like what would have happened if they ended up together, how wild their sex life would be. When I talked to Shayne about it, he calls it just a mistake, but like, you don't do that to someone you love.
So who knows? But for Shayne, if he does suffer from ADHD, which he claims, and he does present in that way, so I don't doubt him, then there's a possibility that it's actually really hard for him to avoid doing things like that. It doesn't excuse it by any means, but it's sort of like one way of, and I've worked with couples along these lines, one way of looking at it is that in the beginning of a relationship, for all of us, for people who don't have ADHD, there's an adjustment period where we have to remember, like the first time you go out with your old single, your long-term single friends, your friends that you're single with, and now you're in a committed relationship, but you go on a girls trip or you go on a guys trip or whatever, and you, with some drinks, you might fall back into the same pattern of just like, oh yeah, let's go check out those people and get their phone numbers or whatever. And then the next day you're like, wait, I'm in a committed relationship. I can't do that. I mean, it's sort of an exaggerated example, but there's things like that. Or maybe a more common thing. Let's say you have a flirty relationship with a former partner. You dated them 5 years ago for a couple years, and every once in a while, you'll just be like flirty and a little sexual because you're very familiar with that person. And then you get in a committed relationship and that former partner flirts with you online and you fall right back into it. And then you, wait, no, what am I doing? Actually, sorry, I'm in a committed relationship right now and I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry about that. So there might be an adjustment period, right? That may or may not be in the awareness of your partner, but you get through it quick enough so that you don't actually harm your partner. So we might understand a little bit of that adjustment in the beginning. Well, with ADHD, you have a much harder time noticing things like that. For example, if we take that example where a former partner flirts, and you could almost say that's really what's happening. Shayna could be considered a former partner, right? And so Shayne gets that DM, and he immediately says like, "Oh," and there's a automatic reaction of, "Well, that's fun. I'll have a little back and forth with her." Well, to the ADHD person, because of their executive function deficits, they might not be able to, So if we were to add up all the things that happen in the brain in the neurotypical person. So the person without ADHD, they get the DM. So there's so many different things that are happening in the brain. One is just like the stimulus and the habit of just like, oh, and then I think of a thing to say, and then I say it right back, and a little bit of enjoyment, like, oh, it's nice to get a little bit of attention, and ooh, there's a little bit of sexual charge or whatever. So you're noticing those things that are pretty powerful impulses, right? But then you have to sort of automatically note, like, wait, there's something I should be remembering, right? Because it's not like this big neon sign flashes in front of you. It says, like, you have a partner, right? But again, particularly in the beginning stages of a relationship, so part of your brain has to go, wait, double check, and then it checks. You might consciously do this, a little bit subconsciously, and then it says, well, that's right, I have another partner, and we committed to each other, and is this breaking that commitment? I don't know. I kind of want to say no, but if I really think about it, so all these things, and there many, many more things have to occur. Even just the awareness that something not in front of your face is still there. People with ADHD have trouble with that. If things aren't right in front of their face, it's hard for them to hold on to it in their working memory, or even just to think, maybe I should check in with these other aspects of my life. And so for the person with ADHD, for Shayne, he might be like, ooh, yeah, D. And then after he does it, maybe a little later, he's like, oh, wait, should I be doing that? But he doesn't really, again, because he has ADHD, he doesn't really sit down and systematically work through it and go like, okay, what do I need to do? Should I send a DM? Sorry, what we did last night over DM, I can't do that anymore. I'm in a committed relationship. It takes a lot of planning. And for people who don't have ADHD, you can do that planning and notice the 50 things you have to take note of. You can do that all at once within half a second. Like these 50 factors like pop into your head. You're like, okay, this feels good. I like to do this. It's just DM, but I do have a partner and we do have a committed relationship and I don't want to hurt them. And what would they feel like if they found out? Oh, they would be hurt. And if I saw them doing it, it would actually bother me. But would it bother me? It's just like all these things that to a neurotypical person happen literally in half of a second, and then you go, oh, I can't DM this person back. And then you think, okay, how do I respond, this sort of thing. But to the person with ADHD, particularly with severe ADHD, which I think he might actually have, according to his account, he can only focus on the 10 things that are happening right in front of his face. And then he goes ahead and acts upon those 10 things, and then he repeatedly does that. So it might not even necessarily be an indication of his love for Natalie or lack of love for Natalie, because I think he really did love her. It's more of his untreated or unmanaged ADHD or something like this. And so when I work with couples in this situation, I might have to explain that, and so that the Natalies of the world, and I check in with the Shaynes of the world to make sure that this is truly what's happening. Now, might the Shaynes of the world use this as an excuse? They could. But if we talk about it in the open, then we say, okay, how are we going to account for this? Because, Shayne, you can't just throw your hands up and say, well, I have ADHD, but you have a greater responsibility to have things in place. The way that I think about it, and sometimes the way I explain it, is if you've seen Christopher Nolan's movie Memento, the protagonist, played by, what's his face, Pierce something, he has this memory problem where he can only remember 3 minutes at a time, and then it's reset, and then it's another 3 minutes or however long, 10 minutes or something. But a way around that is he will write notes to himself, and he'll even tattoo things on himself so it'll remind him of things that he wants to remember from memory loss episode to for memory loss episodes. Really fascinating movie, by the way. Of course, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But so you work around the neurological difference by having measures in place. So for people with ADHD, they might literally have to write a Post-it note and put it on their phone and say, the next time Shayna DMs you, make sure you tell her that you can't do that anymore. Or if anyone, you're in a committed relationship, because you need things to be right in front of you in order to be like, oh yeah, that's right. It's not that you don't care. It's that you have a neuro difference that makes it almost impossible to remember things that aren't right in front of your face. Anyway, so again, does it excuse it? Maybe Shayne is a jerk face and a cheater and a horrible human being. But my impression of Shayne is that he wants to do good, that he deeply loved Natalie, that he really wanted it to work with her. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was something there. Now, there's dozens of other reasons as to why Shayne even though he loved Natalie, would still do something like that. There's a lot, immaturity, or he wasn't as into Natalie as he thought he was, or there was some need that he couldn't get from Natalie that he wanted to get met through Shayna, or he wanted to break up with Natalie but couldn't really admit that to himself, and he was acting out. Like, there's a lot of other reasons, but I just thought I'd talk about that.
You drive me insane.
But that doesn't negate the pain that Natalie went through. I mean, that is one of the worst things a human can go through, is especially to witness it. It's one thing to hear about it, like, well, something happened. Like, well, I flirted with my ex the other day on DMs. It's another thing to read, so it's like she read the line by line. That can actually be traumatic to someone. I've treated people with PTSD as a result of becoming suddenly aware of that kind of thing. They might have come around the corner and seen their partner with someone else, or I can go into specifics on how people can be suddenly aware, and it can be really shocking. So it is rough. At the very least, it can really alter your trust in humans in general, because when you trust someone like that and you love them so much and you think people are caring and good and have empathy and have integrity, and then all of a sudden you learn, well, wait, what? You really wonder, how can I trust anyone? Because the next person I am dating or I'm involved with, they're going to say the same things that Shayne was saying. I'm not cheating on you. I never will cheat on you. I love you. But how would you know? You can't prove a negative. You can't prove that they're not cheating on you unless you have a drone following them all the time. So there's always that possibility. And what if it happens again? It can be really, really hard to recover from that. And again, that's where therapy comes in.
There are similarities between Danielle and her mother, but I wouldn't say that they're the same.
Mom, you're not supposed to hold cats like that. Mom, please.
What is that?
You really aren't supposed to hold cats with their stomach up.
Do you see how comfortable she is?
She's comfortable. Her claws are coming out. Put her down.
Okay, who knows? But this is a psychology reaction video, and I will raise the question. Of course, I have no idea. Danielle and her attachment style, again, I have no idea, but she presented as someone that had significant attachment insecurity. Really, a lot of people on these shows will, but hers was seemingly very noticeable. We might call it preoccupied, we might call it fearful, disorganized, I don't know, but it had some classic markers of preoccupied attachment, meaning that whenever there was even the possibility of her interpreting something that Nick did as an indication that he didn't really love her, that he was going to abandon her, or something along those lines, she would make up the worst possible story in her mind, and then she would be devastatedly hurt, and then she would sometimes actually get angry and accuse him of things that didn't make a lot of sense. Now, Nick had his own issues too, and I talked all about the possibility of that and all the different hypotheses. He would get pretty harsh with Danielle sometimes, and I talked a lot. But anyway, if we're now observing Danielle and her mom, then I will, again, throw out there, this is speculation, this is total speculations upon total speculations. I'm totally speculating about Danielle's attachment style, and thus that we would rewind the clock back in time as to how she would have developed that. And we typically develop our general attachment style, or at least the degree of our insecurity regarding attachment, early in life and within the first few years of life, first 5 years of life. It can be altered as time moves forward, depending on our relationships that happen. You can go through a lot of really early life, early childhood difficulty, but have a lot of recovery and good relationships and therapy after that, and actually have earned security later on. Or the opposite, you could be raised pretty well and go through a lot of bad relationships where you're hurt and thus develop insecure attachment after that. Anyway, point is that if we speculate that she has some sort of insecure attachment, i.e., specifically preoccupied, then if we were to speculate that it derived from her early childhood, then we were to speculate that the mom had something to do with that. We might additionally speculate that the mom presents as someone who is very extroverted, very, very loud, I guess, very social, very quirky, very blunt. Remember from when Nick went over for that dinner. But now we're seeing a specific instance. And again, there's no way to extrapolate from this. But if I were just to point out the themes, because I'm always, whenever I'm watching these shows, I'm just like, what was the childhood like? Well, right now, we might actually be getting one tiny little data point along those lines. It looks like, and as a cat lover myself, I know that when you pick up a cat like this, especially with all these people around, the cat might get really uncomfortable. Some cats like it, but most cats aren't going to like something like that. So the mom picks up the cat and is, very confident that things are going to work out. And then Danielle says, "Mom, can you not do that right now?" She, in a nice way, says, "You're not supposed to do that." And then the mom is like, the cat's fine. Okay, so most people in that situation, since you're a guest in the house and it's your daughter's cat, and particularly if you don't know cats that well, because maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. Anyway, point is most people would say, oh, okay, even if in your mind you're like, the cat's fine. Like for me, if I did something like that, I especially in someone else's house, someone else's cat, I'd just be like, oh, sorry, because you just want to follow the rules, even if you're not agreeing with things. You don't want to put people out. You don't want to just stomp on someone else's request like that or refuse in that way. And she's like, no, everything's fine. And then Danielle's like, but her claws are out. And then you look a little closer, and the cat definitely does look uncomfortable. And then the cat, you can see, is starting to squirm. If you know cats and their body language, I can tell the cat's actually starting to flip, and things get really hairy. At the very least, you're being mean to the cat. Like, why would you do that? Just because you think the cat's enjoying it, and clearly the cat isn't. And now Danielle has to go all the way up and say, "Mom, let the cat go." Now Danielle's being nice about it, but again, speculation upon speculation upon speculation upon speculation, is that the mom has a harder time or has an impaired sense of her ability to take direction or to notice other people's distress or to receive feedback. Is it stubbornness? Is it just a lack of radar, lack of mentalization, self-centeredness? I don't know. Something, an immaturity, wanting to impress people, because if you had a 10-year-old that was doing this, you might say, well, they're 10. They're really sure of themselves and they're not listening. They're being stubborn, or they're in a situation they don't know how to act. But your mom, right? You would think that by then you would have the ability to say, okay, I'll put the cat down, that kind of thing. So again, no idea. But if that were true, then if you're being raised by that, chronically, that personality, as a child, you might often be discounted. You might often be made to feel like you don't matter. Your emotional cues of like, this is bothering me, might fall on deaf ears, that kind of thing. And that can result in a chronic feeling of abandonment in a person, a feeling of no one cares about me, I'm worthless. I need to be very loud in order to be noticed. I have to repeatedly ask for things because no one ever listens to me, even when I'm asking someone to do something quite reasonable. I can't depend on people. People will abandon me emotionally. I don't matter. Rinse and repeat. And you might have someone with the kind of attachment style presentation that she has. Again, speculations upon speculations, upon speculations upon speculations. But you can think about that in your own therapy. And if you're a clinician, obviously, this might be review for you regarding attachment style and how these kinds of things can develop. Because often people will say, well, my childhood was fine. My mom, my parents weren't abusive. So why do I have these problems? There are many roads to insecure attachment.
So cute.
My family is everything. Like, they're my best friends. So the fact that my family's now his best friends is actually like the most important thing to me. Like, Nick goes out with my sister without me. He goes out with my mom and stepdad without me. He's like best friends with them and I don't even have to be involved.
So if you watch my reaction videos, you know that I'm often lamenting, particularly I think the way Americans are when it comes to this, how they don't accept or realize the important it is to bond with your in-laws. That a lot of people will just consider the in-laws to be this tertiary annoyance in their life, and they're never really wanting the in-laws to be a part of life. And what this denies is a good relationship with family members. It also sets up a recipe for disaster if there are conflicts, even minor ones, you have no relationship with your in-laws to be able to establish any kind of back and forth, any kind of repair with that person because you hate each other or you're unfamiliar with each other. Fast forward 5 years and you're mortal enemies with your mother-in-law, that kind of thing. Whereas with Nick, he became friends with sister and mom and actually is bonding independent without even Danielle being there. So I absolutely will applaud that. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Tune in next time when I continue watching and reacting and seeing if anything of interest comes out of my face. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.